Longevity is often misunderstood as a quest for extra years at the end of life, but in reality, it is about preserving function across the middle, the decades where decline quietly begins long before it becomes visible. The body does not suddenly fail, it drifts, and that drift is shaped by measurable forces acting over time. One of the most powerful of those forces is exercise. Movement is not optional biology, it is information. Every contraction of muscle sends molecular signals throughout the body, influencing how energy is produced, how inflammation is regulated, and how tissues adapt to stress. Skeletal muscle, in particular, plays a central role in longevity. It is a reservoir for glucose disposal, a driver of metabolic health, and a determinant of physical independence later in life. Loss of muscle mass is not merely cosmetic, it is predictive. Exercise interventions for longevity are not about burning calories, they are about maintaining systems. Aerobic capacity reflects how efficiently oxygen is delivered and utilized. Strength reflects how resilient the body remains against gravity and time. Balance and coordination reflect neurological integrity. Together, these capacities determine whether aging is accompanied by autonomy or limitation. What matters most is not peak performance, but preserved capacity. Equally important is understanding that longevity is not governed solely by how the body feels. It is governed by what is happening long before symptoms arise. This is where diagnostic screening enters the picture, not as a tool for reassurance, but as a tool for insight. The body can sustain silent damage for years. Vascular changes, metabolic dysregulation, and inflammatory processes often progress below the threshold of sensation. Screening allows those processes to be seen while there is still time to respond, not to panic, but to contextualize. Among the markers that has gained prominence in longevity science is Apolipoprotein B, or Apob. Apob represents the number of atherogenic lipoprotein particles circulating in the bloodstream. Unlike traditional cholesterol measurements that describe the contents of particles, Apob reflects particle count itself. Each particle represents an opportunity for interaction with the arterial wall. Over time, cumulative exposure matters. Decades of exposure shape vascular aging. This is not about a single test. It is about understanding trajectory. Longevity is not dictated by one moment, but by repeated exposure to risk and protection alike. Exercise influences metabolic handling. Screening reveals internal trends. Together, they form the foundation of informed longevity strategy.
Longevity demands a shift in perspective from reactive medicine to anticipatory thinking. The goal is not to fix what is broken, but to identify what is drifting off course while there is still room to correct direction. Exercise, viewed through this lens, becomes a form of preventive architecture. Aerobic training improves endothelial function, supporting blood vessel flexibility and responsiveness. Resistance training preserves muscle fibers that regulate insulin sensitivity and stabilize joints. These adaptations reduce the physiological cost of aging. They slow the erosion of reserve. Reserve is everything. As reserve diminishes, stressors that were once tolerable become destabilizing. A minor illness leads to prolonged fatigue. A short period of inactivity accelerates weakness. This loss of buffer, not disease alone, is what often defines aging poorly. Exercise preserves that buffer. Diagnostic screening provides another layer of foresight. Markers related to lipid transport, glucose regulation, and inflammation reveal how the internal environment is changing. Apob, in particular, offers insight into cardiovascular exposure across time. Research suggests that the burden of atherogenic particles accumulated over decades plays a central role in vascular disease risk. Managing Apob is not about chasing a number in isolation. It is about understanding how lifestyle, genetics, and time interact. Physical activity affects lipid metabolism. Dietary patterns influence particle production and clearance. Stress and sleep alter hormonal signals that regulate these pathways. The system is integrated. Longevity science increasingly emphasizes risk-exposure duration. A modest elevation sustained for 40 years may carry more consequence than a larger elevation discovered late. This is why early awareness matters. It creates optionality. Screening does not dictate destiny. It informs probability. When combined with movement, awareness changes behavior subtly but meaningfully. It encourages consistency over intensity. It shifts focus from short-term goals to long-term capacity. It reframes health not as a feeling, but as a set of measurable processes unfolding across time. The emotional challenge of longevity is patience. There is no dramatic feedback loop. The benefits accrue quietly. The protection is invisible until it isn't needed. Longevity interventions work not because they are extreme, but because they are sustained. The body adapts to what it encounters most often. Over years, those adaptations become identity. The body does not care about intentions. It responds to patterns. Longevity emerges from repeated signals that reinforce preservation rather than erosion. Exercise signals demand. Recovery signals safety. Screening signals attention. Together, they create an environment where decline slows and capacity remains. Managing Apob within this framework is an exercise in long-term thinking. It represents cumulative exposure, not immediate threat. It asks a different question, not what is wrong, but what is accumulating. That shift mirrors the broader philosophy of longevity medicine. The most meaningful risks are those that compound quietly. What makes this approach powerful is restraint. It does not rely on fear, it relies on understanding. It does not demand perfection, it demands consistency. The interventions that matter most are rarely dramatic. They're the ones that can be repeated for decades. Exercise, done regularly, preserves muscle and metabolic function. Screening, done thoughtfully, reveals internal trends. Awareness of markers like Apob contextualizes cardiovascular risk over time. None of these alone guarantees longevity, but together they tilt the odds. Longevity is not about controlling aging, it is about slowing its velocity. The difference between a robust 80-year-old and a fragile 65-year-old is rarely luck. It is often reserve, built quietly, protected deliberately, and maintained patiently. Reserve is created when the body is challenged enough to adapt, but not so much that it breaks. When it is observed early rather than ignored until late. The science of longevity does not promise immortality, it offers clarity. It replaces vague hope with measurable insight. It reframes health as something actively maintained rather than passively awaited. Time will move forward regardless. The question is not whether aging occurs, but how prepared the body is to meet it. And that preparation begins long before it feels necessary, while the body is still strong enough to respond.